She was bathing. He was watching. One moment of desire from King David would trigger a chain of betrayal, deception, and death. A loyal soldier would be abandoned. A kingdom would be shaken. And a woman named Bathsheba would be caught in the middle of one of the most shocking scandals in the Bible. But this is not just a story of sin. It is a story of power, consequences, and redemption. Jerusalem was at peace. The kingdom of Israel was strong under the rule of King David, a man chosen by God, a warrior, and a king after God's own heart. But on one quiet evening, while his army was away at war, everything changed. From the rooftop of his palace, David saw a woman bathing. Her name was Bathsheba. She was not just any woman. She was the wife of a loyal soldier, Uriah the Hittite, a man fighting for the king at that very moment. What began as a glance became a decision. And that decision became a sin that would ripple through generations. Because in the shadows of power, even kings can fall. But this story does not end in darkness. From this scandal would come a child, Solomon, who would one day become the wisest king in history. So how did a story of betrayal become part of God's plan? Why did God allow it? And what does Bathsheba's story reveal about justice, power, and redemption? Tonight we uncover the untold story of Bathsheba. Part 1. The king who stayed behind. The winds of war had come again. Across the land of Israel, the sound of preparation echoed through every village and stronghold. Blacksmiths hammered iron into sharpened blades. Soldiers tightened their armor. Horses were saddled before dawn. Messengers rode tirelessly between cities, carrying orders sealed with the authority of the throne. This was the season of kings, the time when rulers did not sit in comfort, but rode at the front lines. The time when leadership was proven not in words, but in battle. And at the center of it all was King David, the warrior king, the giant slayer, the man who had once stood fearlessly before Goliath with nothing but a sling and unwavering faith. David was no stranger to war. He had lived it, breathed it, survived it. From the days of fleeing under the shadow of King Saul, to leading bands of loyal men through wilderness and caves, to rising as the crowned king over all Israel, David had fought for every step of his journey. Battle was not new to him. Victory was not new to him. But something had changed. A subtle shift. The army stood ready. At David's command was Joab, a fierce and loyal general, hardened by years of war. The target this time, the Ammonites, a long-standing enemy threatening Israel's peace and borders. The strategy was clear. The troops were prepared. All that remained was for the king to lead. But David did not go. Instead, he gave the order, "Send Joab." And with that, the army marched without him. The silence of the palace. Jerusalem did not roar with the chaos of war. It rested. The palace stood tall, its walls unmoved by the tension gripping the battlefield miles away. Inside, servants moved quietly through halls lined with gold and cedar. Guards stood at their posts. The rhythm of royal life continued, but something felt different. For the first time in a long time, David was not where he was expected to be. He was not riding into battle. He was not leading men into danger. He was not standing under open skies with the weight of responsibility pressing against him. He was still. The danger of stillness. At first, it may have felt like rest. After years of war, years of running, years of ruling, perhaps David told himself he deserved this moment. A pause, a breath, a break from the relentless demands of kingship. But not all stillness is peace. Sometimes stillness creates space. And in that space, things begin to stir. Thoughts, desires, temptations that would never have found room in the noise of battle. An evening walk. The day stretched into evening. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Shadows grew long across the city. The heat of the day faded into a gentle breeze. Inside the palace, David lay resting. But sleep did not hold him. Something restless moved within him, subtle but persistent. So he rose. Slowly he stepped out onto the rooftop of the royal palace. From there, Jerusalem unfolded beneath him, a king above the city. From the rooftop, David could see everything. The homes of his people, the quiet courtyards, the flickering lamps being lit as evening settled in. Life was happening below ordinary, peaceful, unaware. And David stood above it all, a king, a man who had everything: power, wealth, victory, honor. Yet in that moment, something was missing. The unseen battle. Far away, his men fought real enemies. Steel clashed against steel. Shouts filled the air. Blood was spilled on the battlefield. But David was not there. And so a different battle began. Not of swords, but of the heart. Because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought in open fields, but in quiet moments, when no one is watching. The first step toward the fall. There was nothing outwardly wrong with what David was doing. A king walking on his roof. An evening breeze. A moment of reflection. It all seemed harmless. But history often turns on small moments. Moments that feel insignificant until they are not. Because it is rarely the great decisions that lead to downfall. It is the small ones, the unnoticed ones, the ones made when no one else is around. A pattern reversed. Once David had been a shepherd. In the fields, under the open sky, he had watched over sheep with diligence and care. He had fought lions and bears to protect what was entrusted to him. He had been alert, focused, present. But now, the shepherd was no longer in the field. The warrior was no longer in battle. The king was alone. The weight of idleness. Idleness is a quiet force. It does not rush in like a storm. It settles, slowly. It whispers instead of shouts. And in the absence of purpose, it begins to reshape the heart. David had stepped away from responsibility just for a moment. But that moment created an opening. And openings invite something in. A night that would change everything. The sky darkened. Stars began to appear above Jerusalem. The city grew quieter, settling into the stillness of night. And on that rooftop, David stood at the edge of a moment that would alter the course of his life forever. He did not know it yet. He could not see what was coming. But the first step had already been taken. Not on a battlefield, but in a decision. To stay. Narration. Pause, optional for pacing. Sometimes the greatest falls don't begin with action, but with absence. The absence of duty. The absence of vigilance. The absence of purpose. Because what David would see next, what would catch his eye in the quiet of that evening, would ignite a chain of events, of desire, deception, betrayal, and consequence that would echo through history. A single glance, a single choice, a moment that could not be undone. Part 2, the forbidden glance. Night had settled over Jerusalem. The city, once alive with the movement of day, now rested under a blanket of silence. Oil lamps flickered behind closed doors. Conversations softened into whispers. The world slowed. But on the rooftop of the palace, King David remained awake. A moment that seemed ordinary. The evening breeze brushed gently against his face as he walked along the high terrace. From this height, the king could see what others could not. The rooftops of Jerusalem stretched endlessly before him. Quiet, still, peaceful. It was the kind of moment that asked for nothing. No decisions, no commands, no battles, just stillness. But stillness can be dangerous. The glance. And then, it happened. A movement caught his eye. Subtle, almost unnoticeable, but enough. David's gaze shifted and settled. There, in a nearby courtyard below, a woman was bathing. The scene was not meant for him. It was private, hidden from the world. Yet from the height of the palace, nothing was truly hidden. For a brief moment, David could have turned away. He could have looked elsewhere. He could have walked back inside. He could have ended the moment before it began, but he didn't. The second look. Because the first glance is often accidental, it is the second one that is chosen. David kept looking. And in that moment, something shifted within him. Not a sudden fall, not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet turning of the heart. Desire. The power of a single moment. Temptation rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with warning signs or clear consequences. It comes softly, through the eyes, through the mind, through a moment that feels small. David was a king, a man after God's own heart, but he was still human. And in that moment, he allowed what he saw to take root. Curiosity becomes intention. The question formed quickly in his mind. Who is she? It seemed innocent enough. Just curiosity, just a question. But questions have direction. And this one was not leading toward righteousness. It was leading deeper. David called for a servant, his voice steady, controlled, kingly. Find out who that woman is. The answer, he didn't stop. The servant obeyed. Time passed. Moments stretched. And when the servant returned, he carried more than just information. He carried a warning. She is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. A line clearly drawn. That should have been the end. Everything David needed to know was in that answer. She was not available. She was not his. She belonged to another. And not just any man. Uriah was one of David's own soldiers. A man currently on the battlefield, fighting, risking his life, serving the very king who now stood on that rooftop. The line was clear, the boundary unmistakable. The moment of decision, this was the turning point. Not the glance and not the curiosity, but this, the moment where knowledge met choice. David knew, and yet he chose to continue. When power overrides conscience, power has a way of distorting reality. It whispers dangerous thoughts. You are the king. You can have what you want. No one will stop you. And when desire is mixed with power, restraint becomes harder to hold. David sent messengers, not to turn away, not to correct his heart, but to bring her to him. The silent descent. There was no thunder, no voice from heaven, no sudden interruption, just silence. Because sometimes God allows silence, so that human choice can be fully revealed. Step by step, David moved forward, not falling suddenly, but descending, slowly, the weight of the choice. Bathsheba came to the palace, not knowing the full weight of what was unfolding. Not knowing that this moment would become one of the most tragic turning points in the life of a king and in the story of Israel, a decision that could not be undone. In that quiet night behind palace walls, David crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. What began as a glance became desire. Desire became inquiry. Inquiry became action. And action became consequence. The illusion of secrecy. The city slept. No crowds gathered. No witnesses spoke. It seemed hidden, contained, forgotten. But some actions never remain in the dark, because consequences have a way of rising. Just like the morning sun, the return to silence. After it was done, Bathsheba returned to her home, and David returned to his palace. Life appeared to continue. The king resumed his routine. The kingdom remained intact. Nothing seemed broken. Nothing seemed changed. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. The calm before the storm. Days passed. Perhaps David convinced himself it was over. A moment of weakness, a private failure, something that could be buried and forgotten. But sin rarely stays silent, and consequences rarely delay forever. The message. Then one day, a message arrived. Simple, direct, unavoidable. I am with child. The weight of reality. In that moment, everything collapsed. What was hidden was now exposed. What was private now carried public consequence. David was no longer dealing with a moment. He was now facing a reality that would demand action, not of desire this time, but of fear. One glance, one moment, one decision. That is all it took. The fall of a king does not begin with a crown slipping. It begins with the heart turning. Part 3. The cover-up. Sin demands a strategy. The message was short, but it carried the weight of a kingdom. I am with child. And the moment King David heard those words, everything changed. The shift from desire to fear. What had once felt like a private moment now stood on the edge of exposure. This was no longer about desire. This was about consequence. David's mind began to race. If this truth came to light, it would not just be a personal failure, it would be a scandal, a betrayal, a fracture in the very image of a king chosen by God. And worse, the woman involved was Bathsheba and her husband, Uriah the Hittite, a loyal soldier, a man currently risking his life in battle. A plan begins to form. David did not confess. He did not repent. Instead, he began to plan. Because when truth threatens to surface, the human instinct is often not to face it, but to hide it. And so David devised a strategy. A simple one. Bring Uriah home. The summons. Far from Jerusalem, the battlefield raged. Men shouted. Swords clashed. Dust filled the air. And among the warriors stood Uriah. Faithful, focused, loyal. A man who had no idea that his life was about to be pulled into a royal deception. A message arrived from the king. Return to Jerusalem. No explanation. No reason. Just a command. And a loyal soldier obeys. The return of a faithful man. Uriah entered Jerusalem not as a suspect, but as a servant. He came with respect, with honor, with trust in the king he served. When he stood before David, there was no fear in him, only loyalty. David greeted him warmly, too warmly. The mask of normalcy. How is Joab? David asked, referring to Joab. How are the soldiers? How goes the battle? The question sounded genuine, concerned, king-like, but behind them was something else. Calculation. Every word carefully placed, every tone controlled. The hidden intention. Then came the real objective. Go down to your house, David said, and wash your feet. A simple instruction. A kind gesture. A king giving rest to a weary soldier. But beneath it was a plan. If Uriah went home, if he spent the night with his wife, then the child would appear to be his. The truth would be buried. The secret protected. Integrity in the face of temptation. Uriah left the palace, but he did not go home. Instead, he slept at the entrance of the palace with the king's servants. When David heard this, he was confused, then frustrated, then unsettled. Uriah was not behaving as expected. A man of honor. The next day, David summoned him again. Why did you not go home? The king asked. And Uriah answered with words that would echo through history. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents. My commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and be with my wife? I will not do such a thing. A stark contrast. In that moment, two men stood in the same room. One a king, powerful, chosen, yet hiding in deception. The other a soldier, weary, ordinary, yet standing in integrity. Uriah refused comfort out of loyalty. David pursued comfort at the cost of righteousness. The contrast was undeniable. When one plan fails, David's plan had failed. But instead of stopping, he went deeper. "Stay one more day," David said. And that evening, he invited Uriah to dine with him. Food was prepared, wine was poured, and the king made sure of one thing: Uriah drank. A desperate attempt. Perhaps David thought, if honor will not move him, then maybe weakness will. If Uriah's judgment was clouded, maybe he would finally go home. Maybe the plan could still work. But even in that state, Uriah did not go. He returned again to sleep among the servants, not in his house, not with his wife. The collapse of control. Now David was trapped. His plan had failed twice. The truth still stood, uncovered, unresolved, and time was running out. Because the longer the secret lived, the harder it would be to hide, the darkest decision. At this point, David faced a choice: confess or cover deeper. And he chose the darker path, a letter of death. The next morning, David wrote a letter. Not long, not complicated, but devastating. He sealed it, and then he gave it to Uriah. "Take this to Joab." Uriah accepted it without question, without hesitation, without knowing that he carried his own death sentence in his hands. The weight of betrayal. Imagine the moment. A loyal soldier, entrusted with a message from his king, walking back to the battlefield. Faithful, obedient, unaware that the very king he served had chosen to sacrifice him. The order. When Joab received the letter, he read the king's command. Place Uriah in the front line, where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so that he may be struck down. The point of no return. There it was. No more deception. No more attempts. Just a direct command. To ensure a man's death. Not for justice. Not for war strategy. But to cover sin. The battle that was different. The next battle came. But this one was different. Because while enemies clashed as before, there was another force at work. A hidden decision. Guiding the outcome. Uriah was placed where the fighting was strongest. And at the critical moment, support pulled back. The cost. The battle took its toll. Men fell. Lives were lost. And among them, Uriah. Faithful to the end. Loyal to the last breath. The report. A messenger returned to Jerusalem. To the palace. To the king. He delivered the news carefully. Strategically. As instructed. And when David heard that Uriah was dead, he responded with chilling calm. Do not let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. The illusion of resolution. To David, it was done. The problem solved. The secret buried. The risk removed. Everything was under control again. Or so he thought. But some actions cannot be buried. Some choices echo louder than silence. A king had covered his sin with deception, with manipulation, with blood. But heaven had seen it all. Part 4, the betrayal of Uriah, the darkest moment. War does not ask questions. It does not pause for justice. It does not wait for truth. It simply consumes. And on the battlefield, far from the quiet deception of Jerusalem, men were fighting, bleeding, dying. Among them stood a man who had no idea. that his fate had already been decided. A loyal soldier unaware, Uriah the Hittite returned to the front lines with purpose. The dust of Jerusalem still clung faintly to his garments, but his heart remained fixed on one thing: duty. He had stood before King David. He had received the king's command. He had carried the sealed message without question. He did not hesitate. He did not doubt. Because loyalty does not suspect betrayal. The letter that sealed his fate, the message he carried, had already been delivered into the hands of Joab, a hardened commander, a man of war, a man who understood what orders meant. When Joab read the letter, he understood immediately. There was no confusion, no ambiguity. The king had spoken. A silent obedience. Joab did not argue. He did not question. Because in war, orders are followed, even when they carry the weight of something darker. And so, a decision was made, not in the heat of battle, but in cold calculation. The setup. The city they fought against was fortified. Its walls stood high, its defenses strong. To approach it closely was dangerous. Archers waited above. Stones could be cast down. Death could come from above without warning. And that was exactly where Uriah would be sent. The front line. The order was simple. Put Uriah at the front, where the fighting is fiercest, where survival is uncertain. And at the critical moment, pull back, leave him exposed. The march toward death. Uriah took his position. No fear, no hesitation. He fought as he always had, with courage, with strength, with loyalty. He trusted the men beside him. He trusted the leadership above him. He trusted the king. The moment of abandonment. The battle intensified. The air filled with shouts and the clash of weapons. Then, at the moment it mattered most, the line shifted. Men stepped back. Positions changed. And suddenly, Uriah was no longer surrounded. He was exposed. The final stand. Arrows flew from the walls. Weapons struck from every side. And in that moment, Uriah fought alone. Not because he chose to be, but because he had been left, abandoned. Not by enemies, but by his own command. The fall of a faithful man. And there, on that battlefield, Uriah the Hittite fell, not as a coward, not as a failure, but as a man betrayed, a man who died believing he was serving faithfully to the very end. Collateral loss. But Uriah was not the only one. Other soldiers fell that day. Men with families, men with names, men with stories. Lives lost, not just to war, but to a decision made in secrecy. The report returns. Back in Jerusalem, the palace stood as it always had, calm, orderly, untouched by the chaos of battle. A messenger arrived, dust-covered, weary, carrying news from the front. He stood before King David, and he spoke carefully, as he had been instructed. The message delivered. The men overpowered us, the messenger said. They came out against us in the field, but we drove them back. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. A pause, then the final words. Also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. A chilling response. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. This was the moment where grief might be expected, where shock might appear, where sorrow might break through. But instead, David spoke calmly, almost coldly. Say this to Joab, he replied. Do not let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. The justification. It sounded reasonable, even wise. War is unpredictable. Loss is inevitable. But beneath those words, was something deeply unsettling. Because this was not just war. This was arranged, planned, executed. The illusion of control. To David, it was over. The threat was gone. The secret protected. The situation contained. Uriah was dead. And with him, the risk of exposure. Everything had been handled. Carefully. Completely. Or so it seemed. The silence of heaven. No thunder rolled. No voice cried out. No immediate judgment fell. The world continued, as if nothing had happened. But silence is not absence. Because even when no one else sees, God sees. A widow mourns. In another part of the city, Bathsheba received the news. Her husband, gone, killed in battle. She mourned, not knowing the full truth, not knowing the betrayal behind his death, only knowing loss. Grief, silence, the final step of the cover. When the mourning period passed, David acted again. He brought Bathsheba into the palace. She became his wife. The child would be born under royal protection. Everything at last appeared resolved. Clean, covered, complete. But one line changes everything. And then a single truth remained, unspoken by men, but recorded in heaven. What David had done displeased the Lord. The fall was complete. A glance became desire. Desire became action. Action became deception. Deception became death. And the darkest moment was not the battle. It was the choice. Part 5. The confrontation. When truth finds the king. The palace stood as it always had. Strong, silent, untouched by the storm that had passed in secrecy. To the outside world, everything seemed restored. King David had taken Bathsheba as his wife. The kingdom was stable. The war continued. Life moved forward. And yet, not everything was as it seemed. The silence before judgment. No accusation had been made. No witness had come forward. No voice had challenged the king. But heaven had not been silent. Because there are moments when truth does not come from men, but from God. And when it does, it cannot be avoided. A prophet is sent. Into the quiet order of the palace came a man. Not a soldier, not a noble, not a politician, but a prophet, Nathan. A man who did not carry a sword, but something far more dangerous. Truth. The courage to confront a king. Nathan entered the presence of David. There were no raised voices, no dramatic declarations. Just a calm, steady approach. Because wisdom knows that truth, when spoken rightly, does not need to shout. The story that opened the door. Instead of accusation, Nathan told a story. A rich man and a poor man lived in the same city, he began. The rich man had many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb. The lamb. He raised it, Nathan continued. It grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. The injustice. Now a traveler came to the rich man, Nathan said. But instead of taking one of his own many sheep, he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the guest. The king reacts. Something stirred inside David. Anger. Righteous anger. The kind he once felt when facing injustice, when defending the weak, when standing for what was right. David's voice rose. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must repay 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. The moment of truth. And then, silence. A pause that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. Nathan looked at the king, and with calm, unshaken authority, he spoke. You are the man. The weight of revelation. In that instant, everything collapsed. The story was no longer a story. The anger was no longer distant. The judgment was no longer theoretical. It was personal, direct, unavoidable. Heaven speaks. Nathan did not stop. This is what the Lord says. He continued, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from King Saul. I gave you your master's house, and more. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. The question that cuts deep. Why? Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? The charges laid bare. You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. No escape. There was no argument, no defense, no excuse. Because when truth is revealed by God, it leaves no room to hide. The consequences declared. Now, Nathan said, the sword will never depart from your house. Because you despised me. What you did in secret, I will bring into the open. The breaking point. For the first time since it all began, David stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped justifying. And in that moment, the king broke. The confession. No long speech, no explanation, no defense. Just 4 words. I have sinned against the Lord. The power of true repentance. It was simple, but it was real. Not regret over consequences, but recognition of sin. Not fear of exposure, but sorrow before God. Mercy in the midst of judgment. Nathan responded, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but not without cost. However, because of what you have done, the child born to you will die. The weight of forgiveness. Forgiveness had come, but consequences remained. Because grace does not erase reality. It meets us in it. The king falls to his knees. David, once strong and unshaken, now fell before God. The palace could not comfort him. Power could not save him. Control was gone. All that remained was surrender. A heart laid bare. This was the moment that would later echo in words like, create in me a clean heart. Do not cast me from your presence. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. The words of a broken king, a humbled man, a heart returning to God. The greatest fall met the greatest truth. A king who thought he had hidden everything stood exposed before heaven. But in that exposure, he found something greater than power. Mercy. The story of King David is not just about failure. It is about what happens after the fall.